Welcome to Veterans Chronicles. I'm Greg Corombos. Our guest in this episode is John Billings, a U.S. Army Air Forces veteran of World War II. Billings served in the 885th Heavy Bombardment Squadron and played a key role in the secret, real-life mission made famous by the 2009 Quentin Tarantino movie, Inglorious Basterds. John Billings was born in Massachusetts and came from a military family. And it was obvious very early in his life that he had a strong love for flying.
Born in Scituate, Massachusetts, raised in Scituate, Massachusetts, until I left home for the Army. My father was an Army man, and so was my uncle. My father bought 2 tickets for air ride at a local airport for my 3rd birthday, and that did it. I was injected and I couldn't get it out. Still can't get it out.
In June of 1942, Billings followed in the footsteps of his father and uncle and joined the Army. Here he describes his basic training experience and pilot school.
Well, since it was Army, a lot of marching. Every base was a lot of marching. During World War II, they conscripted hotels in the boardwalk, Atlantic City. That was our first touch with Army for a month. And then a number of us was taken out and sent to Syracuse University, New York, for 3 months, and then down to Texas for a better part of a year. First was an Aviation Cadet Classification Center, and then an Aviation Cadet Pre-Flight School. Up until then, even completing then, we never saw an airplane. And then there was 2 more bases in Texas. Coleman, Texas for the primary. Majors Field, which is in eastern Texas. Forgot the town that was near, but that was for basic training, and then for advanced training in southern Oklahoma. And that was a little twin-engine Cessna-built airplane, 2 little round engines, and it was nicknamed the Bamboo Bomber because it was made of wood and fabric. Then graduated and went training in southwest Kansas, Liberal, Kansas, for B-24. That school was named the B-24 Command Pilot School.
The B-24 was not his favorite aircraft, but it was the bomber Billings was assigned to.
Well, I thought it was ugly, and it's not the choice that I would have made if I had my choice. They told me I was going to have my choice, but it didn't turn out. I wanted to fly A-20s and A-26s. That is interesting to me because it was close support for ground troops. And instead, I ended up in the stratosphere.
The B-24's mission was heavy bombardment, and Billings describes the difference between heavy and light bombardment.
Well, heavy bombardment is anything that can deliver 6,000 or more pounds of bombs. And the B-24 could hold 8,000. And in addition to that, it could hold all of the shells and belts of ammunition for the gunners, 50 caliber. B-24 had 10 50 caliber guns, 4 turrets and 2 manual, one on each side.
With his 10-man crew, Billings would take to the skies and destroy targets essential to the enemy. Billings describes here what they were looking for.
Railroad yards, railroad junctions, and sometimes, for instance, they discovered that Vienna, everybody's basement had a screw machine of some sort making widgets for the military. So we went in and did mass bombing for Vienna. I was one of 1,500 airplanes one day, all types of airplanes, not all at once, but throughout the day, and that stopped all the widget manufacturing.
Billings and his crew were often met with enemy flak during their bombing raids. But interestingly, Billings says it was not much of an issue for him. And he also shared the story of his most harrowing mission.
It wasn't difficult. You just ignored it. there was nothing you could do about it anyway, especially on the bomb run. The bomb run is a imaginary fix that you navigated to and then turned and flew straight line for maybe 25 miles, and that was for the bombardier's sight. As a matter of fact, once the bombardier says target acquired, he threw a switch, and that bomb sight navigated the airplane right and left. All you did was keep it on the altitude, or if you were not the first one, you just flew next to the airplane was in front of you in a position. As soon as the bombardier said, bombs away, then you got the airplane back, descended sharply and turned sharply so to defeat the aiming capability of the gunners. There was one flight that was supposedly a milk run, which was a name given to something that you really shouldn't be getting credit for. It's so easy. They said that, number one, they only have 8 guns that can reach your altitude. And number two, the sky is totally covered with low clouds, and so we will be bombing on the lead bombardier's radar sight. Well, they really did have 8 guns that get up there. We got in visual range of the target. We hadn't turned on to the initial point yet, but we could see the previous flight up there, and it did. It had 8 bursts, and the 8 bursts happened at once. They had some sort of a device that would do that. Whatever the Germans were in those days, they weren't dumb. They were using our transponder, which in those days we call them friend or foe. And they just we would put down a code into it, each mission, that identified you. So the IFF, identification friend or foe. But they didn't care what the identification was. All they knew was when they sent out a radar blip, it came back to them. And all they needed to know was arithmetic, and they could set the shells to go off then. And they aimed them by radar. Each 8 burst that we saw a B-24 slide off like that. Well, after we got on our initial point, we had lost 2 already. Now there's only 5 of us. I was relatively new, so I was in the last echelon. And the long story short, we ended up with only 2, and the person who was in front of me said, "You better take over. It's only my 6th mission." I said, "Do whatever you want, but this is my 2nd mission." And he said, "Well, we don't have a bomb sight." And I said, "Well, we're up here. Guess at it. Tell the bombardier to guess at it, and we'll drop on your drop," which we did. Well, during that time, because of airplanes going out, I was a little out of position, so I was sliding over to get into a tight position with this one over here, and he got it in the bomb bay. I mean, it was just a blinding flash and taking away your eyesight, and when it came back to normal, there was nothing. And that trip, when I landed, the ground crew chief met us, and he said, "I want to show you something." On that side of the airplane, the left side of the airplane, there was all little tiny pieces of aluminum, almost like aluminum foil, that was stuck to the side of my airplane. That was his airplane. And of course, that meant that 10 men were, that was probably the most notable flight to me, because I see that recurrent many times.
We will have more with U.S. Army Air Forces veteran John Billings after a short break. I'm Greg Corombos, and you're listening to Veterans Chronicles. This is Veterans Chronicles. I'm Greg Corombos. Our guest in this edition is John Billings. He's a veteran of the U.S. Army Air Forces in World War II. Because of his love for flying, John Billings was a perfect candidate for covert missions run through the Office of Strategic Services, or OSS, which was the forerunner to the CIA. Billings explains how he was recruited to be part of these clandestine operations.
The love of flying didn't escape my seniors, and no matter what little small flight there was, the colonel would say, well, get Billings, he'll fly it, and Billings did. My navigator and 4 back gunners took extra missions trying to keep up with me. One such day, my 4 back gunners, the right and left waist gunners, the belly gunner, and the tail gunner, all went on the same mission. At first I thought it was the same airplane, but it was not. It was 4 different airplanes, and none of them got back. And within 3 days, I was called in and said that I was going to go to the 885th. And I said, what am I going to be doing down there? He said, you'll find out when you get there, if they want to tell you. We didn't use the term OSS at all. That was not to be breathed. And we were, of course, minus 4 crew members in the bomb group, and there was 2 extra crew members in the 885th that had no other, so they sent us down there because the 885th only used 8 crew members because they took off the belly gun and made a tunnel so that the people going out would not catch on anything. I guess that's how we got there.
Here, Billings talks about his special plane and what it was like to fly one of these secret missions. However, his very first mission ended up with the bombs landing on our own allies.
Number one, they were all at night, and the OSS B-24s, in addition to no bottom turret, was painted gloss black. So that was to make it hard for the Klieg operators to hold the Klieg light on the airplane, because it just makes one little sparkle instead of showing up the whole wing pattern. At first, we were given just supply trips. It was interesting. We got there and we were going to have a little training session for the Bombardier, because the Bombardier was going to have to use not a bomb site, but just to guesswork to drop out people and parachute loads and so forth. And so we were given the airplane and told to go up and practice with a limited crew. And it was a southeast port on Adriatic. That's where our airport was. By the way, it's still an operating airport at this day. And they had somebody else's bombardier instruct my bombardier how to do this. So he said, this time it's going to be dry run, and I will tell you what I see to the time and let us know. Okay, and they went, and they had the conversation and circled back around and made another run, and this time my bombardier was going to say what time, and he said, this looks good. And of course I'm hearing it because it's on intercom, and the other bombardier says, okay, let's go and do it, and we'll dump the load on it and see how good it is. Okay, so my bombardier said to him, okay, might as well open the bomb doors. And that bombardier reached down too quick and hit the salvo lever instead of the bomb door lever, and out went all of the loads through the closed doors. The doors were just flapping in the breeze. Well, that wasn't the worst part. All the things that were in the bomb bay, live ammo, etc., landed on a British supply ship sitting in the harbor. So my first flight for OSS turned into an international event.
When we come back, we'll hear about John Billings' most famous mission. I'm Greg Corombos, and this is Veterans Chronicles. This is Veterans Chronicles. I'm Greg Corombos. Our guest this week is John Billings. He's a veteran of the U.S. Army Air Forces in World War II. And as we explained in the previous segment, Mr. Billings was recruited to run secret missions for the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, which of course was the forerunner for the CIA. It was working on these classified missions that Billings would run the mission made famous by the 2009 film Inglorious Basterds. The men Billings dropped off included German-born Jew Frederick Mayer, who would infiltrate the German army and convey key intelligence to the Allies for months to come. Of course, when Billings set out on his flight in February 1945, it seemed like any other mission. He had no idea it would become one of the most well-known stories of the war.
That was just a normal, routine procedure. We checked out the engines, taxied out to the end of the runway, waited, and then in due time a little panel truck came up onto the right wing, and people got out and got in the Bombay catwalk, and went aft. And then a person would come around on my side of the airplane and salute, and that meant the airplane was all tied up and we were ready to go, and we did. This one was a little different in that maybe 2 hours into the flight, the radar operator said, "We got a message," and the message decoded to, "If no reply from the ground, do not come home. Orders will follow." So we flew as if it was going to work. We got up there, and there was just absolutely no way that we could let out people. It was just solid clouds. The top of the valley we needed set them in was visible. We could see that, but that was 3,000 feet above the place where they're going to go. I wouldn't let them get out. So we turned around, and by then the radar operator had the place to go, and it happened to be Rosignano, which was a base that was on the Mediterranean side of Italy, south of Pisa a little bit. Well, we landed. Now they showed up the next morning at chow line, so we went over and introduced ourselves as the front crew. And that's the first time, in fact, it's the only time that I ever saw the people that we dropped out. And we talked. Fred Mayer was very talkative and told me all about his training in airplanes and all the different airplanes that he flew. And he told me that he stole on an assignment with Franco an airplane and headed for England, but got shot down because it was a German airplane. And he floundered in the North Sea, but a fisherman came along and he talked him into taking him into England. Of course, that turned out to be fabricated, but I didn't know that. That was wonderful science. Well, we got word again, do not come home until the mission is finished. And so we went the next day. There was no way you could see anything. Then the P-38 with a camera airplane came back, and it showed dense clouds up there as well. So that next day we didn't do anything. Well, my navigator was always looking for time to calibrate instruments. So he asked me if we could go and do a calibration run for the airspeeds. I said, sure. And I said, Fred, would you like to come along and sit in a co-pilot seat since he flew all those military airplanes? He said yes. And so we did our run, and then the navigator said, okay, I got enough information so we could do what we wanted. And I said, okay, Fred. So it's out over the harbor, and he flew the airplane at sailboat mast height right up in a cut in the mountains, and Immelman himself would clap. And then he says, okay, that's enough. And so we went back, and that night we didn't do anything. And then the following night, now that was the night of the 25th of February, we got up there and it was just packed in again. And my bombardier and the dispatcher that wasn't going to jump out, he was just going to oversee everything. It was so important They didn't want to use our dispatcher. But anyway, they decided that there was an alternate place that they could land on. It would take them an extra day, but at least they'd be on the ground and start the mission. So I told them to give us a steer to that place. Well, it was, and it was going to be down the slope. So I cleared the rim. I say rim, this was a volcano of centuries ago, and left jagged, straight things you could see. Well, they were 13,000 feet. So I cleared that and pulled the power off and let the airplane go down. Well, it went down all right. Went faster and faster. And I then remembered in briefing, the weatherman said there's going to be high winds in the Alps, maybe 200 miles an hour. Well, I didn't recognize it initially because it's so smooth up there. But now it wasn't so. It was going down, so I put the power back up and to normal, and I wasn't slowing it down. I put it up to maximum except for takeoff, which means that's the power that you can run those engines forever. That didn't slow it down. And you know when they say in a tight situation like accidents, time stands still? Well, I encountered that, and I'm still putting more and more power on until it was over maximum, and so it was still not enough. So I put the little latch on the controller for the turbo controls of the engines aside and put it all away. And the manifold pressure went off scale, and I don't know how much horsepower, but it appeared to be slowing down. Well, all of a sudden it stopped going down. Well, I looked out, we were at the bottom of the valley, so that the winds couldn't go down any further. And the valley, in peacetime, you could just fly out the valley, over the Brenner Pass, and down to the Adriatic Sea, no problem. But Brenner Pass was fortified, the heaviest of the Italian area, and so I had to just keep circling back and forth across the valley. And at one time, my bombardier, who was sitting in the nose turret, says, "Turn, John, turn." So I did. It took 23 minutes battling that downdraft back up there. Now, we were lucky. Number one, it was in a cold, cold winter, and we're in the Alps, so the tendency of overheating the engine was not present. But at the end, my navigator, he was a bus budget, and he recorded everything to the second. And he recorded when I pulled the power off first, and then they recorded when we finally got to the bottom of the valley. And we had lost 6,000 feet in 18 seconds, which I doubt if anybody could make a B-24 in still air, make a B-24 go down that fast. So we got back up at the top and could clear the 13,000-foot peaks and put the power back to normal, and the co-pilot says nothing went out of the green, which was almost unbelievable, but that made me fall in love with the Pratt & Whitney engines. And I said, well, everything's working good. Let's go over the primary target once more before we go home. Well, wouldn't you know, it was wide open. So I alerted the back that we were going to let them out, and we did, and went off a little ways as planned, and then came back, and they gave us the proper flashlight that all was well, so we gave them the parachute containers. We had 3 to go along with them, and Fred, who was the leader, he had a 150-pound bag strapped to his legs when he went out of the airplane, and the ripcord was tied inside the airplane, so it immediately opened, and additionally pulled a pin that let that 150-pound container go down so it would hit the ground first and then let the parachute slow him down so it wouldn't hurt him. Now, we didn't know it was successful until quite late. Near the end of our missions, we got a message from our headquarters, someplace, that their mission was successful. And that's all we knew. And I didn't see Fred or any of those people again until 1966-ish. But after that, I found that Fred was living right around 100 miles away from where I was. I got called Distinguished Flying Cross because of that. I didn't think I distinguished anything, but...
John Billings was a pilot for the 885th Heavy Bombardment Squadron for the U.S. Army Air Forces in World War II. I'm Greg Corumbus, and this is Veterans Chronicles. Hi, this is Greg Corumbus, and thanks for listening to Veterans Chronicles, a presentation of the American Veterans Center. For more information, please visit AmericanVeteransCenter.org. You can also follow the American Veterans Center on Facebook, and on Twitter, we're at AVC Update. Subscribe to the American Veterans Center YouTube channel for full oral histories and special features, and of course, please subscribe to the Veterans Chronicles podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and please join us next time for Veterans Chronicles.